looking at Genesis chapter 11, verses 27, and then we're going to go through chapter 12, verse 9, and that will actually wrap up our part one of our series on the book of Genesis. Part two will be next January, and then part three will be a year after that. I'm not sure for others who have kind of participated in the Bible studies. I was reflecting on it this week, this kind of being the end of part one of just how much I've enjoyed this study. I learned a lot, which is saying a lot for me because I took Old Testament survey 4 times in college because I kept failing it, and I learned a lot again. So some of you probably wish you knew that before I applied for this job, but. They're just like us. Yes, just C's get degrees. Anyways, but no, I've enjoyed this study, and I've enjoyed the this is a plug for the Bible studies. If you maybe didn't do one this year, or you've been wondering, one of the joys about the Bible studies, you get to go through a book, and you get to ask. There's some questions and there's some conversation, and so there's that aspect of it. There is this beautiful byproduct with the Bible studies also, and that's the community that it builds. And so as much as I enjoyed the learning and the studying and the knowledge, it was also the fact that each week I got to spend time with people here in the Rise Up community and got to know them a little bit better. And so if you are here this morning and you have not done a Bible study, or you've kind of been teetering on the fence, I would encourage you the next time we do another study like this, which will be obviously in January, maybe even earlier, to just take that little leap of faith and join one of the Bible studies. There's always the option to create your own. And so if the times and schedules don't work with what's been established, create your own and start your own little Rise Up community wherever fits you better or fits you best. So, all right. So that's my shameless plug for Bible studies. And now we're going to move on to our text. So I'm going to be reading this morning Genesis chapter 27, verses through 12, verse 9. This is This is where we get to hear one of our main characters of the book of Genesis. This is where the introduction of Abram, who will then become Abraham later on. This is where he enters the story. So this is the account of Terah family's line. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran became the father of Lot. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans in the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Ishkah. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. The big idea for us this morning, the main takeaway that in one sentence that I hope we can all walk away with, is that God takes a bold step in his plan to restore the relationship between humanity and himself. This is, as I mentioned, this is the introduction of Abram. And not only is it the introduction of Abram, one of the main characters in Genesis, he is also one of the main characters, one of the patriarchs in the Jewish faith, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The choosing of Abraham is this bold step in God's plan, because up until this point, chapters 1 through 11, God has tried to restore the relationship between him and creation, and it continues to have its shortcomings and failures, not on God's part, but because of humanity's and our part. And so God says, all right, I've tried these different ways. Let's just pick one person. Let's start with one person. And through that person, restoration can happen. And so it's a bold step, because it just takes one person. So how I want to walk through our story this morning is I want to spend a little bit of time just looking at the actual story. We're going to kind of mine out some nuggets from it that are maybe worth our attention. And then we're going to shift a little bit, and then we're going to try to our best use our imaginations to imagine what it was like to be Abram when this story happens. So first off, this story is a continuation of a sort of connecting the dots in the book of Genesis. That going all the way back to Genesis 1, you have Adam. Now I'm just going to I'll just kind of stick with the male figures, even though there are the female counterparts, but for the sake of time, this is connecting the dots from Adam to Abram. So you have Adam, who eventually has a son named Seth that continues the line, and then Seth brings about Noah, which is a continuation of the line. Noah eventually gives birth to Shem, and Shem is a continuation, and then Shem comes about, from Shem's line becomes Abram. This is this continual line in the book of Genesis, in the genealogy of God's people, where there is faithfulness and this worshiping in connection with Yahweh, with God. And this is just, so Abram is the continuation of this. And actually you could argue that the previous chapters have actually led up to this particular point in the story of Abram now being the person. Now Abram, he leaves, he is going to leave three things. God tells Abram, you need to leave your country, your people, and your father's house. And the reason I put that in the quotations, I'll tell you just a minute. Country. All right. This is, by country, we mean the land that he is familiar with, not just in regards to the faces and the community. It's also the land he is used to working, the land that he is used to traveling. He's going to leave his country, his familiar place, and go somewhere else. In that leaving, he also then leaves his people. He leaves the familiar faces, his friends, some relatives, his neighbors, the people that he probably did some trading and working with. And he's leaving them to go to a different place. And then he leaves his father's house. Now, the way that the author says it, his father's household. By house, what we mean is that in this time in history, this is what's referred to as a patriarchal society, in which the male or the father, sort of everything was dependent upon him for the rest of the family. And so when Abram is told to leave his father's house, what he's told is, leave the system that you are under. Leave your security, leave your safety, leave the comfort that you have in being part of this system and go somewhere else. Now, in that leaving, God promises 4 things to Abram, which is a pretty good return on the investment. Am I right, Randy? If you give up 3 things and you gain, it's pretty good. So Abram now is promised 4 things by God. God says, you leave these things, your home, your country, and your people. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and others will be blessed by you. Now, there are some reasons that God picks these 4 things, and I want to just kind of walk through them quickly here. The idea of making a great nation, this is comforting for Abram to hear for 2 reasons. One, in order to become a great nation, a nation needs land. And so God tells Abram, you are going to inherit some land. You're going to inherit some territory. And not only are you going to inherit territory and land, you're going to inherit the people that live within those boundaries. So you're giving up something, but you're gaining something even greater. So that's one thing that kind of implies or happens through this idea of the great nation. Now, blessing him. Now, what we hear this term bless, we use it a lot even in our culture today, our modern words. I say it a lot towards people, actually. I end a lot of my emails with blessings. To the ancient ears, to hear blessed by a divine being is a powerful thing, because the divine beings at this time didn't bless everybody. And so for Abram to hear God say, I will bless you, I will make your name great, and I will bless you, is that there is this divine favor for prosperity and for a future for not just Abram, but his descendants as well, which is actually then why we hear the next phrase when he says, I'll make your name great. That Abram will not only inherit a land and a territory, and not only will within that be a blessing that people will remember him, that he will get to have his own sort of identity within this area. Side note, it's sort of interesting that God tells Abram here that one of the things he will bless him with is a great name. And just before this, we heard the story of the Tower of Babel, which is a story of a group of people trying to make a name for themselves. So what we actually have here is we have this sort of reversal of the Tower of Babel in the story of Abram. The last thing that we hear is others will be blessed. Now, this is a couple different things. For Abram, what he would most likely hear is that by others, he's thinking, okay, my descendants, the people that will come after me, my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all the way down, but also most likely the territories that they will inhabit later on. For the modern-day reader, for us today, this is a foreshadowing of the Messiah. That through the line of Abraham would eventually become David, and through the line of David is where we get Jesus. So even in Genesis chapter 12, and we've heard throughout the book of Genesis, these little glimpses of the Messiah of Jesus, this is yet another time when we hear that. So he is leaving, Abram is leaving Ur. What we know about Ur, the city of Ur, is not... I'll put it this way. The city of Ur is a bustling metropolis in the ancient Near East. The city of Ur is based on by archaeologists and some historians have identified Ur as this hub of trade and commerce. It was a pretty developed city in the ancient Near East, right around 2500 BCE. They had an infrastructure. They had some sort of a sense of government and structure in that with the system. They had a religious system in place. This is not some backwoods in the desert place that Abram can't wait to leave. Ur is what we would think of like today's major metropolitan areas. So New York City, Tokyo, London. I mean, places that when you think of, the forefront of civilization, that's what Ur was. So Abram leaving is significant, not just because he's leaving his home and his people and his father's household. He's also leaving a place of popularity, a place where commerce happens. They begin to travel, his family, to Canaan. That's the intent, but they stop in Haran. Haran is a similar city to Ur, not as big, historians can tell, but it was still a main trading route, and so it was another popular place, which is most likely why Abram and his family stopped there. They stopped there probably because they had done some work there prior or known people from there. And so they stopped there for a period of time. We don't know how long, but we can, historians and scholars say they stopped for a few years and stayed there. Terah, it's where he would eventually die. Now, this migration, so we were talking about this on Thursday at our Bible studies. Why did they leave? Why would Terah take up his family and leave? Well, this is a common thing actually happening at this time. There are these major groups of people that are kind of migrating through different parts of the ancient Near East. And so there was most likely this group of Semites, or from people from the line of Shem, so Abraham's family descendants, that were probably moving most likely up that way. And so for Terah and his family to sort of hop onto that caravan and make their way up towards Canaan, that would have made sense at the time, and it was popular to do it at that time. What's interesting is they want to go to the land of Canaan. Canaan is inhabited by the descendants of Ham, which is sort of like the black sheep of the family. Not only that, Ham is not this developed metropolitan area. Canaan is a pretty rough place. Canaan is kind of a scary place to go. The journey together would have been over 1,000 miles, which, I mean, driving 1,000 miles is a lot. I can't imagine walking it. But nonetheless, this is where they are headed to, and yet they stop. They stop in Haran, and then eventually they make their way from Haran, Abram, and he makes his way from Haran towards Canaan. This is where I want to shift our focus a little bit to not just taking a closer look at the story from maybe an academic side. I want to, and mining out some of the nuggets, I want us to imagine what it was like to be there. What would this story look like through the eyes of Abram? So I invite you to imagine with me. Abram is this young man living in the Mesopotamian area, and he is surrounded by security and comfort and stability. That he is in a time when family is everything, where your future, your past, your present, your future all rely on the family that is around you, that your identity is rooted in that and where you are from, and that if you want to survive and live and be able to then carry on your family's name, you stay put. You don't leave. You stay where you are. And then, out of nowhere, and what I mean out of nowhere is that Abram and his family were not worshiping God at this time. Most likely, Abram and his family worshiped the moon god, Nana. Not your Nana, that's the name. Nana is the name. That's who they are worshiping. They are worshiping the pagan god. And then out of nowhere, Abram hears this, and we don't know how, whether it's an audible thing, but he hears God say, leave. Leave your country. Leave your people, leave your father's house, and go. Period. In other words, Abram hears, leave your security, leave your comfort, leave your future, the thing that's going to make sure that you can self-sustain and self-preserve, leave those things and go. And the period there is because God doesn't tell Abram where to go. He just says, go. This, in my opinion, is very unsettling if I'm Abram. Because if my life, I know this is the cliche, but if my life depended on me staying where I was, and God tells me to go, but doesn't tell me where, I am going to be a little hesitant on leaving. And I think that's okay to say. I'm not saying that that's unbiblical. I think that's a totally real thing to feel. This is a radical move by God, right? But yet God's a pretty radical person if we think about it. That God continues to use the most unlikely ways and the most unlikely of people and unlikely characters to accomplish his goal, to restore and redeem the brokenness of creation. And so this radical God calls Abram and tells him to leave and go, but God then promises to give him more. He will give him land, a nation. He will make his name great. That he will be a blessing to others. And that he will ultimately, through all those things, be blessed by God. It's as if God says, I know, Abram, I am asking a lot of you to leave the safety and security of your home and your people and your father and your future. I know I'm asking a lot of you, Abram. Trust me. Trust me. Abram trusts God in this moment. I've wondered this past week how and why Abram could do this. And the only thing that I could come up with that made sense is that Abram would have heard the stories of Adam and Eve and Noah. He would have heard the stories of Cain and Abel and of Seth. He would have remembered sitting around the fire with his family, hearing the stories of Japheth and Ham and Shem. He would know what the world was like before he got there and how chaotic it was, and that it was continuing to spiral out of control. And so I've wondered the way that Abram could do the how and the why is because he realized there wasn't a better option in front of him, and this might actually work. That in the midst of the chaos that Abram was born into and somehow in his family line had been a part of, that maybe this God is bringing about order from all the chaos. And Abram gets to be a part of that story. What Abram, and I'm not sure, but what I imagine God hoping Abram hears in this moment of leaving and going is that he's saying, Abram, I so badly want to be reconnected with this beautiful creation that I have been so intimately a part of, that I want to restore this brokenness, and I need you to be the one that starts it. I need you to be the one that starts this process. When I hear God give those promises, that covenant with Abram, God is saying that out of the depths of his heart because he so badly wants to fix what's broken. But he knows the way to do that is through using broken creation, through using Abram. And Abram says yes, and Abram begins this journey of going where God calls him to go. And each time, from what we hear in the story, each time Abram has this interaction, this conversation with God, he builds an altar, and he praises and he worships God. Now, one of the reasons that there's a couple of reasons why he did this. One is that Abram is creating these physical reminders of where God showed up in his life. And the other one is that then it could be for future generations to go back to and be reminded of the God that has led them there. That, in a way, Abram is being reminded that it's not so much about the destination of where they're going, it's about the journey to get there. And then along the way, Abram makes these waypoints along the way that he could be able to go back and say, I was here when God told me to stop. I was here when God told me that this land will be given to the next generation. It was here when I called upon the name of the Lord. It was here when I made this commitment to turn from the pagan gods that I once worshipped and worship this single God. It's reminders along the journey. This is our story still today, friends. God calls you and me to step out. God calls us to take this risk, maybe not as significant as Abram's, but still a risk at times, to trust him. And he's doing it because he wants to restore what is broken. And in that process, it means then that we have to leave something behind. There is something that we have to learn to maybe set aside or turn away from in order to better focus our attention on where God is calling us to go. And as God blesses that, as God blesses our opportunity to put our faith and trust in him, he also then says, your blessing isn't just for you, it's so you can be a blessing to others. Now, I thought, what's a story that could maybe highlight this, or what's a story that could help us better understand this? And I didn't want to make it about me, because it's not about me. And so I'm going to make it about John and Sam Heisiga. I didn't... So, I know I might not have all the details right. But for nearly 2 decades, John and Sam were successful church planters in Rockford, Michigan. And John, retired guy John, could have retired from there, and he could have had his swan song anywhere. Him and Sam could have left River Rock, and they could have done what many people do when they retire. Traveled and vacationed and spent time with family and friends, and sort of just began to just exist in this area. And somewhere in the process of that, John and Sam hear God call to them to plant a church in Cedar Springs, Michigan. To take this step, to trust him, and to see what he is doing and partner with him. Now, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, John and Sam, the reason you two could say yes to that so easily is that you have a whole journey of saying yes to God. You have set up altars throughout your life of where God has kind of showed up and showed up and showed up. And so you could say yes because you realize it's not about the destination, it's about the journey we're on. And so God will be faithful just as he's always been faithful. And in that faithfulness, this church, at that time, thought this church will be a blessing to this area. Okay, so that's them, all right? Part of Rise Up's story is that we are here also because of the foundations built on another church, Pioneer Christian Reformed Church. Pioneer was a faithful community that was planted by Grant Christian Reformed Church originally as a chapel here in Cedar Springs, Michigan, and it grew and became this faithful place. As God would see fit, Pioneer would eventually close. Some of you here were a part of that community. And that journey from the beginning to even its closure was the foundation, the thing that they could look back upon, and then Rise Up could sort of pick back up and say, this is God's faithfulness continuing through Pioneer. So that's that story. Another component to this story is that the first church I took a call to was Grant Christian Reformed Church. And I remember hearing the stories of Pioneer being planted at a Grant Christian Reformed Church. And when I left Grant Christian Reformed Church back in 2020, I didn't think I'd ever go back into ministry. God asked me at one point, and I was sitting right where Jeff and Bob were. I was doodling while John was preaching. That's how I listen. I'm an active listener. I was sitting there and I remember God asking me to trust him. That I had to set behind my frustrations and my animosity and my bitterness and my fear and my brokenness. And I had to trust him that he had something for me. And at that time, I didn't know what it was. All it was at that time was just to go here. Just go here, he said. A few years later, I'm now here. Didn't think this is where I would end up. Still shocked sometimes. But again, this isn't about me, though. What I hope we can see in this moment, right, is that God is at work. That God is continuing to use unlikely people in unlikely circumstances to accomplish his goal of restoring this broken world. That he wants to bless you so that you can be a blessing to others. That's why he's called you here. That's why he's planted Rise Up Church here in Cedar Springs, Michigan, that we can be a blessing to this community. And the beautiful thing is that God is doing that on an individual level, like in each and every one of us, but he's also doing it in this communal level here. And our stories get to weave together to be this beautiful tapestry of God's kingdom and his building that he's building and that we get to be a part of. This is not just our story. This is a continuation of the story going long before us. Jesus. We are a continuation of the gospel, friends. That God chose one person to reach the whole world, his son Jesus. God would make this promise through Jesus to make God's kingdom great, to make God's name great, to be a blessing to others, and to be a blessing to those that are part of that community. We talked earlier about connecting the dots. Abram eventually comes to Jesus, brings us to Jesus, the continuation of the promise which leads us to here today. We're just a continuation of it. I'll restate it again. The big idea for us this morning is this, is that God takes some bold steps to restore brokenness. Some of you may feel like God choosing you is a bold step. And it is. But that shows the power and the might of a God that can redeem. That he's going to use people who think this is a risk, God. He's going to say, I know, but I still want to use you. And because of that, we have hope in God's relentless pursuit of us and others. that this story of Abram leaving and going, that it changed the history of human civilization. That we are all recipients of Abram saying yes, of God's relentless pursuit of us and of others. What I wonder is, how do we continue that story today? How do we allow God to use us as individuals and as a community to make some bold steps to restore the brokenness of this world still? And how do we then rest and find our comfort in the hope that God's relentless pursuit of us and others in our community is still happening? Are we willing to take that risk and take that step? I feel at this point it is somewhat important for me to pause and say that if you're here this morning and your relationship with Jesus is a bit uneasy. Maybe it's a little hostile. Maybe you've got a lot of questions and you just don't feel like you're getting a lot of answers. And so maybe some of the stuff I've talked about, you're like, yeah, that sounds great, Pastor Ben, but I mean, how does it apply to me? Well, if that's you here this morning, I want to give you the opportunity to start today. That maybe God's asking you to leave behind those things and to go with him. That he is inviting you to take this journey with him today, to follow him, so that you can be blessed, that you can be a blessing to others. If that is you here this morning, I hang out in this area afterwards. Just come and talk to me. I'd be happy to pray with you and walk you through that. A couple questions to reflect on as we wrap up our time here. In light of this story, what am I, so I'm going to say this, I'm going to speak these to myself, and you can push them onto yourself too. What am I willing to give up or leave behind? And at that same time, is there something that feels like it would be too much to give up? I'll be the first to say, yes, there are some things that feel like they would be too much to give up. And so that maybe my response to that is, I need to pray about that. The third one, though, is how can I be a blessing to others? How can your story, your life, your resources, your talents, your skills, you just as you being you, how can you be a blessing to others this week? And then how can we as a community be a blessing to Cedar Springs? Not just this week, but the weeks and the months, and by God's grace, the years to come. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for waking us up. God, I thank you that you are a God that continue to ask us to trust you, and you continue to then reveal yourself and bless us. So thank you for the blessing of Rise Up Church. Thank you for the forefathers and foremothers before Rise Up Church that began the work for us that we get to now stand on today. Father, as we place ourselves here at this time in history in this area, God, help us to be faithful to the calling. Help us to listen and to hear. And if you ask us to leave, ask us to step out and go, may we do so trusting you. And Father, as we trust you, may not our name become great, or may we not be the one that gets the recognition, but may you and your kingdom, both now and forever. We pray this in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and all God's people said, amen. If you're able to, I invite you to stand. We're going to sing, and then we'll have our closing blessing before we go.
We're going to end with a benediction that I suspect some of you grew up with. And we're going to do it the way that I grew up doing.